Our keynote speaker knows a lot about it. Stacie Goffin has been a leader in early education for many years. She led NHSA's reinvention of their early childhood accreditation system, which introduced national program standards for early childhood programs. Before that, she was a program officer at the Kaufman Foundation, which is the largest foundation devoted to entrepreneurship and supports initiatives and research on how individuals can gain economic independence through education and entrepreneurship. She led the founding of the Early Childhood Funders Collaborative in Kansas City and the West Virginia Network for Young Children. In her current endeavor, leading the Goffin Strategy Group, she works with a wide range of organizations to design and implement early childhood initiatives. She has also published widely in the areas of childhood advocacy and leadership in early childhood. One of my favorite of her many books is Ready or Not, Leadership Choices in Early Care and Education. She wrote it in 2007, and I'm amazed how prescient she was about the current state of affairs in early childhood. In the book, she warns that decisions of policy and practice are being made on the early childhood field's behalf. In 2007, she was calling for early educators to become leaders in the transformation of the field. 6 years later, this has come up many times this week, as you remember. We're still struggling with how we can be leaders in this time of great change and upheaval in our field. So it's fortuitous that Stacie comes to us today. We should listen very closely to what she has to say. And please give a very warm Head Start welcome to Stacie Goffin.
Hi, everyone. I want to see if I can still say good morning. So you can see by the topic of today's presentation, and that was a perfect introduction segue. Yasmina, thank you, and thanks also for making it possible for me to be here. I want to talk about what I'm considering to be early childhood education's next frontier, which is leading for its future. So what I want you to kind of underscore in your mind is frontier and its. So leading for its future. I'm going to try to make the case that early childhood education is a fragmented field of practice. Notice the underscoring again, because we tend primarily as a field to give attention to our fragmented delivery systems and policies and give much less, if any, attention to the fragmented our practice. And that other than working with children or on their behalf, there are a few commonalities that bind us together in terms of shared knowledge, preparation, qualifications, commitments, or aspirations. So what's really important for you to appreciate about the remarks that I'm going to be making is that this is not about Head Start personally. This is not about just you. It's about all of us who are engaged in the field of early childhood education. And what I hope is that even though you've been here for a long and intensive week and had already a fairly long morning, that you're going to feel provoked by the end of this conversation. I will know that I have been successful if you feel like your brain has had to be exercised. And so not only do we not think of ourselves, if you will, beyond the fact that we work with children or on their behalf, we don't think of our individual roles as something larger, as part of something larger than ourselves, or our programs, or our separate sectors. So I'm willing to bet that if you're at a cocktail party and somebody asks you, what you do, you say, you're in Head Start, you're some role in Head Start. You're unlikely to put it in a larger context. So what's in store? One, I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about what's changed for early childhood education. Most of it will be familiar, but it will help to set the stage for the fact that this is a very dynamic moment for the field. I'm going to try to make the case that this is time for internal change, for change from the inside, and to note for us that we spend almost all of our time trying to convince others about what they should do on our behalf. We spend much less time leading for our own future. Arguing why it matters, presenting what I call habits of mind that are constraining us from stepping into the role of leading for our own future, and again, inviting us all to in fact step forward and to take that leadership role. So what's changed for early childhood education? First of all, our scale. So for those of us who have been in the field, we were just hearing 20, 2 decades, 20 years. For those of us who have been in the field for that length of time, there has been tremendous expansion. We're no longer a very small, little kind of hidden, invisible group on the landscape, if you will. There are tremendous changes in family and societal demographics. There's tremendous growth in intervention programs such as your own and public funding. Expanded delivery systems. We have nonprofit, faith-based, home-based, charter schools, public and private schools, and then of course the number of children who are in some form of an early childhood education setting. And there's increased public recognition of the importance of the early years in early education. So as was just mentioned by a group, tremendous increase in what science is telling us. And there's increased, as a result of the impact of marketing around those findings, we have considerably larger engagement by business leaders, by the police, by the military, I mean, you name it, right? There are all kinds of advocacy groups on now behalf of our issues across, broad swaths of society. There's also, crucially, a policy shift from early care and education to early education and care. There's a shift from federal to a 50-state change strategy, pretty much cemented by the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge, which pretty much says to states, each of you gets to figure out what it looks like, even though it's within a fairly prescriptive framework. We've had a system-building focus on coordinated policies and delivery systems, and I think, crucially, a framing of preparation and professional development as a government responsibility versus a field's obligation. So I want to show you this slide. I know you've all seen it in some variation or another. And that this is what has governed, if you will, or guided our system-building efforts. And it's certainly, I think, pretty much a mantra for Head Start in the sense of thinking about the whole child involving all of these, what people often call petals. But the point that I am going to be edging into is that in some ways, this picture holds us back because it makes it more challenging for us to be clear and focused about what it is that are our particular or specific, unique contributions to children's learning and development as early educators. So I realize there are probably people in the room who are outside of it, maybe coming from the social work field, maybe coming from a range of different roles because you're part of that system of Head Start that's looking at the whole child and the family and in the community. But what I'm really focusing on is early childhood education and how, in fact, some ways, because we're about it all, it's very hard to say who are we and what exactly do we do and what exactly is our unique contribution. So what's changed for early education? We have increasingly an alignment on early education programs with K-3. Sometimes it's birth to third grade as a frame of reference. Sometimes it's literally a pre-K to third. We see early childhood education as an achievement gap intervention strategy, which I think some would argue is very much downsizing what many of us would see as the role of early education. That may be a piece of it, but whether or not that defines us, I think we could have an interesting conversation about. We see an increasing focus on teachers and teaching. So conversations that we're having right before I presented actually about the role of class says it all in some ways, that there's an increased focus on responsive teacher-child interactions, effective instruction, child outcomes, program accountability, and again, to the previous conversation, the use of data to inform teaching and to track outcomes at multiple levels. So policy has become the primary lever for changing ECE. And advocates are becoming the face and the voice of the field versus those of us who are responsible for its results. So I want to pause and let that kind of just sink in because that's a pretty provocative statement. This is not in any way to diminish the crucial role played by advocates, and we certainly heard what a difference it made because we had Ruth in her role with Congressman Miller. But again, that's pretty significant that the face of our field is increasingly represented by advocates rather than by those of us responsible for its results, which is very different from almost any other field of practice. So what's changed for us? The context for our practice, the expectations for our work, and what it should achieve. And importantly, a widening gap between public expectations and the field's capacity to deliver. Remember, that doesn't say Head Start's capacity to deliver, it says the field's capacity to deliver. So it's looking at that broader scope again of the field. Our work is occurring now in dramatically changed context from 10 years ago, and frankly, when you think about it, even from a year ago. And our work and our future is being redefined. Head Start probably knows that more than almost any sector in the field. It's being changed in terms of purpose, the way the agenda is set for early education, what the public expects of us, and what teaching looks like in an early childhood education setting. So this is pretty much a time of uncertainty. For some, that is incredibly anxiety-provoking. But what remains unchanged, and remember I promised to be provocative, is us and our inertia. And so I think it's time for us to acknowledge our contribution to the present status of things, to identify practice, meaning teaching, as the field's core work, and to assume responsibility for the quality of the field's practice. It's time for us to exercise field-centered leadership. So not just spending all of our energies trying to get others to exercise leadership on our own behalf, but for us to begin to organize ourselves in a way so we can exercise leadership on our behalf and with others. So that's what I'm calling internal change. Change from the inside. So we've achieved long-desired recognition, but we've not stepped up to the field's new realities. There are growing demands for teacher effectiveness. We're expected to demonstrate instructional competencies in literacy, math, science, support social and emotional development, and show demonstrable contributions to children's learning and development. There's a drive for accountability. We're expected to produce program results and deliver child outcomes. And there are increased external involvement and influence in defining the work of early education and the children who are served. So we are now an out-of-home experience for most children. It's no longer an invisible field. I like to say that it used to be that we thought we had a lot of influence. The reality is, we were invisible, and so nobody really cared what we did. We could do whatever we wanted to because no one was paying attention to us. But that's no longer the case. We are no longer an invisible field. And we are far more complicated to provide. We are struggling to sustain core beliefs. We are highly politicized. If I may take this risk, one of the things Ruth didn't say in her remarks when she said that we were always asking what is best for children, and I believe that. But in order to get anything passed, she also had to ask what was going to succeed politically. And we have become highly politicized. And we are expected to produce results. But we lack the ability to deliver on the promise that we believed in long before we had the empirical science to back it up. So my contention is we need to assume responsibility as a field of practice. We need to change from the inside and to recognize that that process is different from external advocacy of trying to convince others to like us, to think we're important, and to do what we want them to do. So we may not often think beyond our individual programs and sectors, but policymakers and others are. They are thinking about how early childhood education should be organized to do its work. Because others are thinking that way, and we're not, they're taking the lead in defining what it means for us to be a field of practice and determining how we should be governed. And this opening exists because we're not structured as an organized field of practice with a common purpose and a sense of shared obligation. So others are shaping us as a field of practice, and I would suggest that this is a defining moment. Too many young children are losing ground. Too many are not accessing their potential. There are big gains in the knowledge base, but we're not applying them. There are increased expectations for our performance, but we're not meeting them. Others are filling the leadership void. We can do better, and we're not. Why? We need as a field to adapt to changed and changing circumstances. So I'm just going to pause for a second and let you in your own mind just kind of mentally think, when you see that word adapt, what does it mean to you? Just think for a second. What does it mean to adapt to changed and changing circumstances? We need to transform ourselves into an organized, professional field of preparation and practice that holds ourselves accountable for practitioner performance, program quality, children's success in kindergarten and beyond. Avoiding change is not an option. So I want you to pay attention, if you will. I ask you to pause to think about adaptation and what that meant. Now notice that the next verb, if you will, is transform. Because the work ahead, if you buy my argument, is a combination of both adaptation and transformation. You can't, go for your dreams without taking into consideration what your realities are. So there's some unique mixture, if you will, or combination about how those come together. But then I want you to note about transforming ourselves into an organized, professional field of preparation and practice. Because almost everyone would say, but we are a profession. But in fact, if we are not organized and holding ourselves accountable for practitioner performance and program quality and the results, then we are not, in fact, a profession. The work we do should be recognized as that of a profession, and we should be recognized as professionals. But we're not a profession until we in fact organize so that we have the attributes that allow us, again, to hold ourselves accountable for performance, program quality, and the results. So left for us to decide is who's going to drive the field's future. Is it going to be the field or others, such as philanthropists, business leaders, and policymakers? And if you think about it, you think about it in your states in particular, it is often philanthropists, right? Because they have a new initiative and something they're really interested in that drives the work. It's a business leader, and we all try to galvanize them and to support us. And there's a little bit of be careful what you wish for. And policymakers, because they are driving us. And you spent a week, to some extent, thinking about the ways in which that's the case and how to react. So I've cast my vote in terms of the question of who I think should be leading the field. I would ask you, what do you think? As you can see, this is from a wealth management advertisement, but I think it works perfectly. Staying the course is like navigating a new world with an old map. So it's time for change from the inside by becoming an organized field of practice. So now you have to say, well, what the heck do you mean, lady, by the word organized? So if you look it up, it means planned, it means well thought out, it means prepared, it means having a formal organization or structure, especially to coordinate or carry out widespread activities. So among the examples would be organized medicine, and then my most favorite, organized crime. So again, I'm just going to ask you to pause. If we had more time, I would love to invite a little bit more conversation around all this. But think about organized crime. What makes them organized? What do they have in place? I mean, if somebody could shout it out really loud, that would be great. A couple of examples.
Hierarchy.
All right, they've got it. Okay, and hierarchy doesn't have to be, I mean, what is a hierarchy about? You have to pause for a second because we tend to think of hierarchy as negative, but what hierarchy means is what? It means a structure, people know what their roles are, they know about their relationships between and among the roles. Hierarchy doesn't have to be rigid, right? There's a hierarchy in families too. Okay, what else?
Loyalty.
Say again?
Loyalty.
I feel like we need somebody walking around the mic. Did you hear it?
Loyalty.
Oh, loyalty, okay. Something really important that's missing. Loyalty to what? Yeah, organized. They were watching The Godfather to their family, but what pulls them all together? Yeah, mission. They all know what they're doing. They may implement it in different ways, but everyone knows what they're working for. Right? That is huge. That's the glue. Everyone knows the purpose. And everybody is pulling together toward that same purpose. So even though, again, it does make us chuckle, these are both examples of organized fields of practice. Because there actually is a skill set even for organized crime. So we're a fragmented field of practice. We're not organized around shared intentions and outcomes. And so, again, I would love to invite more conversation, but what is the name for our field? The list is growing, actually. So, early care and education, I love this one the best. Early care and education and care. We don't even know which way to take those same words, right, and put them together. Early childhood education. Early care and child development. I think the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge was early development and learning. They came up with their own new packaging of words for the Early Learning Challenge. When I have an opportunity and interaction with groups to say, what do you think the name of the field should be, and people work in small groups, they invent new ones, suggesting that the ones we have still don't, for many of us, name who we are and what we do, because the name tells you what you do, right? It's identity. When people say Stacie, it has, I hope, it has some meaning, because, I mean, that name, that label, should have a lot attached to it. If we were to ask what are the outcomes we're trying to facilitate, we could have a really robust conversation. And if we were to ask to whom the field is responsible and accountable, we probably would get inconsistent responses. So in order to move to become an organized field of practice, we're going to have to figure out purpose, responsibility for what we would hold ourselves accountable, which is very different than being told by others for what we should be accountable. Distinguish between our teaching role as being really central to the field's purpose from those roles that are working as part of that infrastructure that enable teaching and programs to, in fact, provide for children and families what it is we aspire to. And I would argue, which again could invite a great conversation, that it's time for us to start thinking about us as a field of specializations. So right now, we tend to think about, we use the word early childhood, which I have to admit I struggle with because pediatricians say they do early childhood. They're audiologists, PTs, OTs, etc. that are all part of something called early childhood because that defines us by the age of the person we're relating to. It doesn't describe what our work is. It speaks to, again, an age. But I would suggest that we have a number of different sectors in the field or different types of programs and specialties that require us to think about different knowledge bases. There's a common knowledge base that's glue for all of us, but then what you may need to know and be able to do to be effective in a Head Start environment could be very different than what's expected in a child care setting or what's expected in a preschool versus even what's in a pre-K. So by way of an example, pediatrician or the healthcare field always provides a great example in this regard. All physicians, right, have the same basic core knowledge that unifies them as a field of practice. And then after that, they specialize. So an internist then has an additional body of knowledge, radiologists, cardiologists, and we could go on. And it's not that one or the other is better, it's just that the knowledge base that is needed is different. And many of us hope that we will never need the knowledge base of a surgeon or a cardiologist. So they are all contributors to the whole of being able to promote healthcare and health prevention. There's a shared knowledge that binds them together, but there's also unique knowledges that each of them bring to bear. So they know what is common, and they know what is distinctive. And in the process, if we were to move in this direction, it's going to require willingness by all of us to let some things go. So if we choose, if you choose, because there's no we without each of us as individuals, this can be a time for determining shared responsibilities for shaping the field's future as a professional field of practice, and for realizing our aspirations to be recognized as professionals. And it will require us, again, to develop a system of preparation and practice with internal accountability around shared purpose. And I would suggest that early childhood education as a profession is missing in action. So everyone knows Yogi Berra? Does everyone know Yogi Berra? Okay, just want to make sure that wasn't a generational issue. You've got to be very careful if you don't know where you're going, because you might not get there. So very quickly, why it matters, or maybe I don't need to say it anymore, maybe I've already said it. But where we are going to be able to go is going to depend upon whether or not we're willing to unify as a field of practice, or remain a mix of disconnected programs and services, whether we structure ourselves so strong programs are uniformly provided, so we no longer have to keep saying that there are only 4 programs that are good. High scope, Abecedarian, Chicago parent-child centers. If we assume responsibility for the field's competence, or whether or not that is just an individual option, which is what it is now. Some programs are allowed to be good because the people who are there are passionate and do what it takes to deliver it, and others are less good. Yasmina mentioned my role with NAYC in leading the Accreditation Reinvention Project, and one of the biggest complaints during that time was the fact that a program that had been accredited lived next door to another program that was also accredited. It couldn't show the same demonstrable kind of results that were deserving of accreditation. So that variability speaks in large measure to our lack of willingness at this point to hold ourselves accountable. And whether or not we choose to step up to the opportunity and the responsibility to change our future. And if we don't make these decisions, I think we know, or don't move forward in this way, I think we realize that it's going to make it hard to create a coordinated system. It's going to allow children to continue spending their days in programs of uneven quality and effectiveness, and we're creating a void for others to field. So, yes, we don't own all the challenges presented with the current status, but I would suggest that leadership passivity is leading to a widening gap between rhetoric and behavior, between promises and behavior. So I would argue this is a matter of integrity and doing what we know is in children's best interest. So now you're not going to all be able to see this cartoon, and my apologies, but this is Calvin and Hobbes. And they're in a wagon, and they're rolling down the hill, and Calvin says, "I thrive on change." And Hobbes says, You threw a fit this morning because your mom put less jelly on your toast than yesterday. And Calvin responds, "I thrive on making other people change." All right, I just want to quickly say or identify what I believe are early childhood education's habits of mind, and then I think I'm not going to go into the details of them, so you're going to let me scroll through a couple of slides after I name them. But one I would argue is our timidity as a field of practice. Another, I would suggest, is resistance to distinctive scopes of practice that makes very clear, again, what is our responsibility in terms of our scope of practice. And evangelical orientation. We see ourselves very often as child savers and don't think anybody else has that passion as much as we do. And that often gives us a certain missionary zeal, and that can make it harder for us to hear and listen to what other people have to say about what maybe needs to change. and we have a reliance on others to elevate the field's worthiness. So we think we do really good stuff increasingly because we're finally appreciated by business leaders, for example. And so we look to others to approve of what we do and to think what we do is worthy. So needed is a willingness to step forward, which is a definition of leadership that comes from Adam Kahane that I really like, and to lead for the future. And so there you go. To lead means to step forward. It means working on the edge of what is acceptable or comfortable. So very often we glamorize leadership. And in fact, it's actually very hard work. And it often can be very uncomfortable. So it requires courage, commitment, and stamina. It requires a change of heart, mind, and habits. We have to be willing to change ourselves before we can change together. And it requires us to feel our way forward. If at the end of this you were to ask me as your question, so what do we do next? As often as asking me, it is I can offer some possibilities, but ultimately there's no blueprint that tells us how to move from where we are to where we want to go. And all major, big leadership shifts require stepping forward and engaging, and in many times figuring out what the next steps are while you are in fact in the work. And I'm willing to bet that almost every one of you has lived that. And even when you create those plans, that's why people say 5-year plans, 10-year plans, it's just not possible. The world is too dynamic. And what makes it scary, so why the courage is a part needed, is because it means risking the present as we know it for an unknown future. There are no guarantees we can get to where we want to go in the way we want to be there. My feeling is that unless we try, we can't forgive ourselves. And that's why, for me, again, this is a matter of integrity. So, if we chose to organize as a professional field of practice, it would be transformative, even though the change process itself would be incremental. But it would totally rewire us as a field of practice. The opportunity for change belongs to us. It would require a decisive break with our habits of mind, and it would elevate teaching and define us as a professional field of practice. This is not a typical moment in time. If we were to arrange ourselves as a profession, it would allow us to bring increased consistency to children's early learning experiences and formal settings. It would allow us to transcend 50-state change strategies and the diversity of programming and auspices. When you move from one community to another, from one state to another, you are confident in counting on an individual when you choose your new dentist, when you choose a new physician, when you interact with a nurse, physical therapist. It's their individual competence that you are relying on. And then placing that competence in an environment, in a program, in a setting that creates the conditions for that individual to in fact perform competently. It's crucial to us becoming accountable as individuals, and repeating myself, it's essential to our integrity as a profession. ECE is going to continue to change. Standing still is not going to make a difference. Change is not an option. We can step forward, we can organize ourselves as a professional field of practice and shape what the change looks like, or we can prepare ourselves to be changed. Thank you very much.
Couple of questions? Questions or comments? And I did forget in my introduction to say that I did invite Stacie to be provocative. This being sort of the end of a long week where you heard a lot of voices, a lot of conversations that we hear. You got a chance to eavesdrop in some of our panels. And so this is a good opportunity, and I see somebody wants to comment. Hi.
Hi, my name is Peg Tazewell. I'm from Knox County, Ohio, the director of Knox County Head Start. This is a Head Start group. And the people who are still sitting here are the people who have been doing this work and have been changing constantly at the local level for the last 10 years. If change hasn't happened, I would suggest that it hasn't happened at the national level. And I would invite you all to come to our communities. Because what I learn every time I come to an event like this is that there is remarkable, remarkable stuff happening in our local communities. My center is one of the 10 Head Start Centers of Excellence. But the fact of the matter is that when I come to this kind of event, what I see is the work that we do, it's happening everywhere. And there's a little tiny piece that maybe we did, and frankly, I write a really good grant, and that's why we were named one of the 10 Head Start Centers of Excellence. But this work is truly happening everywhere in our field, everywhere in the Head Start field. I'm sorry because I think you're preaching to the choir. It's the people who didn't come to this conference maybe that needed to hear this message. And I would also challenge you from your place within NAEYC that the folks who need to hear this message sometimes more than Head Start are the other early childhood folks in our field, because we are always reaching out and trying to partner with them to redefine the field. We do not get that same respect backwards, in my humble experience and opinion. But thank you for being provocative, you certainly were.
Congratulations, one, on being a Center for Excellence. Secondly, I need to clarify, I am not with NAEYC. I left NAEYC in 2005, I think. So I am not with NAEYC at this point. I was with them during the accreditation reinvention project, so it's important to make that clarification. Anyone else?
Hello. So thank you for your presentation. We were just sort of chatting at our table. So I just have a simple question. If you were to do three things, looking at the research in terms of Head Start and what you've seen in pre-K recently, what would be the three things that you would recommend that Head Start does to sort of continue moving forward?
I'm going to reframe the question so it fits in the context of the presentation. Remember, I tried multiple times to note that this was not personal Head Start, that I was speaking about field of practice. All of us who are in a variety of different settings and programs and roles that are engaged either directly or indirectly with improving the care and education of young children. So that's very important for our context. And I think in terms of though an immediate next step, and one I'm actually engaged with, is that there are some of us who simply have to come together and step up and start having these very difficult and challenging conversations. That I've had an opportunity a few years ago with a small grant from the McCormick Tribune Foundation to examine other fields of practice and to see how, when they had big issues that were influencing the field overall, what I call a field-wide issue, how did they approach it? What did they do to try to make, again, major internal change? And in examining these other fields of practice, many times, it's just people stepped forward. That's the way things happen. You don't just always wait for other people to do it. If we care about some of these things, we have to step forward to make it happen. But to deal with these really big issues about what would it take to organize us systematically as a field of practice so that we would no longer be missing in action as a profession at the table when decisions are being